We're all interacting with AI every single day, but do we really know what's going on under the hood? Well, today we're going to pull back that curtain and take a hard look at the hidden flaws AI might be inheriting directly from its creators, which, of course, is us. So, this leads us to the huge question we're tackling. Is AI really this objective, impartial thing? Or is it just holding up a mirror to our society, reflecting all of our own messy biases and imperfections right back at us? To really get a handle on bias in AI, you've got to trace it back to the source. And that source, well, it isn't some super complex algorithm or a piece of silicon. It's human. It all kicks off with something called unconscious bias. It's basically a mental shortcut, right? Our brains are constantly sorting and categorizing everything we see based on our past experiences. And sometimes that leads to these snap judgments we don't even realize we're making. And hey, we all do it. Now, this is so critical because AI isn't born neutral. It learns from this gigantic ocean of data. All the books, the articles, the websites, the random conversations, all of it created by humans. So if our data is soaked in our biases, the AI just learns them as fact. And this has huge real-world consequences when these tools are used for things like screening job applications or deciding who gets a loan. All right, let's actually see how this plays out. We're going to run a simple creative test on an AI to see what kind of hidden assumptions it's working with. Okay, the prompt seems harmless enough, right? A story set in the Victorian era, a scientist, a big discovery. But here's the key. Notice what we didn't say. We never once specified the scientist's gender. This is where the AI's default settings get really telling. And boom, there it is. Without us saying a thing, the AI defaulted to a male protagonist, Dr. Edmund Bellamy. In the AI's mind, the default setting for a brilliant scientific hero is, well, a man. So let's just break this down. This is a perfect example of bias. The AI isn't being malicious, it's just spitting back the patterns it found in all the data we fed it. And historically, most of the famous scientists in its training data were men, so it just reinforces that old stereotype. It literally can't even picture a female scientist in the story unless we explicitly spell it out. Okay, so that was an example of an unconscious, kind of inherited bias. But what about something more deliberate? Let's poke around and see if we can find a political bias that might have been intentionally programmed into the system. For this little test, we're using a specific AI model called DeepSeek. We asked it for a critical poem about a pretty controversial world leader, Vladimir Putin. And yep, the AI had absolutely no problem with that request. It generated a poem that hit on themes of fear, expanding power, all very clearly critical in tone. No hesitation. Okay, so next, we gave it the exact same prompt, but we just swapped the subject to Xi Jinping, the leader of China, which happens to be the country where the DeepSeek model was developed. And the response? Whoa, a complete shutdown. The AI just flat out refused the request. You see, this isn't some subtle little bias. This is a hard-coded wall, a digital do not enter sign. I mean, when you put them side by side like this, the picture is just crystal clear. The model seems to be programmed to avoid any criticism of its home country's leadership, but it's totally fine taking shots at others. This doesn't just feel like a learned bias, it feels like a boundary that was built in on purpose. So we've seen unconscious bias, and we've seen what looks a lot like deliberate censorship. But why are these models so susceptible to this stuff in the first place? Well, it all comes back to the data. This chart, wow. This really gets to the heart of the problem. AI models are overwhelmingly trained on content from dominant cultures and mainstream voices. What that means is that marginalized perspectives, different languages, and alternative viewpoints are just a tiny, tiny fraction of the data, if they're even there at all. The AI's entire worldview is skewed right from the very beginning. And, there's this common idea that we can fix this by just feeding the AI more and more data. But if that new data is just more of the same, from the same biased sources, all we're doing is amplifying the problem. We're making that dominant perspective even stronger. So, knowing all this, we can't just passively accept whatever the AI spits out. We have to become more critical, more thoughtful users. The question is, how do we actually do that? And this is where we have to put our critical thinking hats on. Let's take an example, right? Let's say an AI calls a flying chariot from Indian mythology a myth. Is that bias? Well, maybe. The key question you have to ask is about consistency.
If it also calls flying chariots from Greek mythology and Norse mythology myths, then it's applying a uniform standard. But if it only singles out one culture, that's when it crosses the line into clear bias.
And this brings us to a really fundamental truth here. We are never going to create a perfectly neutral, unbiased AI. Why? Because we aren't neutral. The goal isn't some impossible standard of pure objectivity. It's about being able to spot when a particular perspective becomes a harmful systemic bias that starts to silence other points of view. So, what can you actually do? It's pretty simple. First, just know that bias exists. In any system, human or AI, it's there. Second, think critically. Don't just take the first answer it gives you as gospel. And third, challenge it. Actively push back. Ask why. Ask why not. Kicking the tires is one of the best ways to uncover its hidden assumptions. At the end of the day, the biases that show up in our AI aren't just some technical problem that we can fix with a bit more code. They are a direct reflection of our own societal flaws. So the question this incredible technology forces us to ask isn't really about the machine at all. It's about us. If AI is a mirror, what can we change about ourselves to build a better reflection?